Today I'm sharing 10 watercolor portrait mistakes that completely ruined many of my early paintings and that still frustrate a lot of beginner artists. Some of them probably frustrate you too. I will also share some simple fixes that helped my students stop repeating them. Mistakes in watercolor aren't bad, they're cues. When I pay attention to them, I paint better. When I ignore them, I repeat them for months. So these 10 mistakes aren't rules, they're simple patterns that I wish I noticed earlier, because fixing even one of them makes portrait painting so much easier. Let's get started, and while you watch, try to notice which mistake you recognize in your own work and let us know in the comments. Mistake number 1 is using the wrong materials. When someone struggles the most, it is almost always the paper, especially in portraits where shading on the face needs to be soft and layered. If your paper is not at least 300 GSM and ideally cotton, and you should go check that out, it breaks down immediately. It is very hard for such paper to handle even 2 layers without piling. This is very discouraging because it makes you feel like you're bad at watercolor when really the paper just is not made for what you're trying to do. Good watercolor paper, it also dries slower. It gives you time to think, to adjust, and blend your shadows instead of rushing and fighting the surface. Second culprit can be your brushes. If the bristles in your brush are too stiff, they lift the pigment instead of layering it, and everything becomes patchy. The right brush won't magically fix everything, but it makes basic techniques so much easier. We all know that good materials can be very expensive, but here are a few hacks that you can try when on a budget. Instead of getting expensive blocks, you can always buy large watercolor sheets of cotton paper and cut them down yourself. Good quality and still affordable paper here in Europe is Fabriano. One sheet costs around €4, and I usually cut it in 4 portrait-sized pieces, which is about €1 per piece of paper. For brushes, squirrel hair brushes are surprisingly affordable and incredibly reliable. They are around 7 to 10 euros, they can last a lifetime, and if your budget is very tight, even a simple goat hair calligraphy brush works beautifully for watercolor. Mistake number 2 happens before you even start sketching, and that's to choose a bad reference photo. A lot of beginners pick references that are beautiful as photos but terrible for painting. I'm talking about the typical magazine style photo with flat lighting and no clear shadow shapes. Then people wonder why their portraits look flat and why they can't place the shadows correctly. Watercolor, it needs clear light direction, which is always easier to paint. Highlight and mid-tone and a shadow. If you can't see them easily, the reference won't support you. So look for images where the face has some sort of structure. It gives you a roadmap. Most importantly, choose reference photos that make you feel something. If an image sparks a tiny yes inside you, that's a much better starting point than a technically perfect but uninspired photo. Even better, take a friend of yours outside to a clear daylight and try to take a few photos yourself. Good references don't just help your technique, they keep you motivated to finish the painting. Mistake number 3, and this is a bit controversial, is relying on tracing photographs instead of learning proportions. So here's the problem. Sketching can feel slow, intimidating. It really can feel like a skill that you're somehow supposed to already have. So a lot of people skip it, trace the outlines, and never actually learn the structure of the face. So tracing isn't bad, it can help at the beginning. It can even motivate you because the artwork looks a little more finished, a little better. But depending on it for every single portrait becomes a trap. Without understanding proportions, you take away a lot of your artistic freedom later. I also did this at the start of my journey, and looking back, it was the single biggest mistake that cost me years of progress. Artworks that I created never quite felt like my own, and I could see a clear disconnect between the traced outline and the actual painting. Another thing that bothered me was that the traced outline never showed any personal style. It was very hard to create something recognizable as yours when the starting point is identical every time. So when you draw, you interpret what you see, whether it's a live model or a photograph, in your own way. You can still capture someone's likeness while creating something new and unique. And in my opinion, the uniqueness matters more than getting the proportions perfectly correct when you're starting out. Once that you begin drawing on your own, you are not only overcoming the fear of sketching, you'll also be surprised by how quickly your skill develops. In my case, it was not years, it took weeks or just a few months before I could put together a decent face on paper. So if you're at the stage where sketching feels really scary and you don't know where to begin, taking a structured class can help a lot. Skillshare is the sponsor of today's video, and it is an online learning platform with thousands of creative classes for beginners, hobbyists, and working artists. Their teachers are real experienced creatives, people like Brent Eviston, Gabriel Bricky, Marco Bucci, even Rizzo Chen, whose work I absolutely adore. Recently I took a class by Anne Shen. She's an illustrator and author with a fun, approachable style. In her class, she teaches how to ease into drawing faces without the pressure of making everything look realistic or photographic. It is a gentle introduction to proportions using simple tools like pencils or Procreate if you prefer digital. Taking her class kind of reminded me how valuable it is to learn from someone who presents the foundation in a relaxed and encouraging way. On Skillshare, you can also find my own classes. I currently teach 7 courses there, with 3 of them focused entirely on helping beginners start painting watercolor portraits. If you want to try Skillshare, the first 500 people who use my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen will get the 1 month free trial plus 20% off their first year if they choose to continue. Another big issue is muddy skin tones, and my subscribers mention this more than anything else. Muddy skin usually happens for 2 reasons. Either the paints are low quality and full of fillers that kill transparency, or the mix contains way too many colors. When you keep adding pigments, they neutralize each other in the mixture and the skin quickly turns gray or lifeless. A simple fix is to keep your mix to just 2 colors, ideally artist grade and transparent, and use plenty of water. I use cadmium-free orange and cadmium-free red from Winsor & Newton as my base for portraits, and I don't add anything else except water, and that's what gives the most luminous result. Always test your mix on a scrap piece of paper. If it already looks muddy before it even touches the portrait, it won't magically improve on the painting itself. Mistake number 5 is something that can flatten the portrait instantly, and it's not protecting your white areas. In watercolor, the brightest highlights come from untouched paper, not from paint. Once that you lose these whites, it is extremely hard to bring them back without the painting looking chalky or overworked, and this happens to the best of us. A simple fix is to decide on your highlights before you start painting and then leave them untouched, or soften the edges around them with clean water so they feel intentional and not accidental. Most of the time, just slowing down for a few seconds and planning your whites makes a huge difference. In one of my previous tutorials here on YouTube, I showed you how you can lightly map your highlights with pencil and then paint around them. This is very helpful when you're still learning, and later, with more experience, you'll remember your highlights naturally without having to mark them first. Another mistake is using too many colors or using them without intention. Color is one of the strongest tools in visual language, and when we ignore that, it takes a toll on the entire painting, including portraits. There are brilliant artists who can combine 5 or more saturated colors and make it look beautifully balanced, but most of us are not built that way. For most people, sticking to basic color theory and limiting the palette gives far better results. No matter which brand or colors you choose, you can't ignore the relationship between warm and cool tones. Grays and blacks act neutrally and can support both groups, but once you start mixing every color you own, the harmony disappears. If choosing colors intuitively still feels difficult, I have a simple rule that I use to choose one cool and one warm color and then support it with something neutral like a granulating black. In my own paintings, I often pair purple with orange, or I will use orange with green, or orange with turquoise, or even red with green, for example, plus a black for support. And sticking to this small limited palette of colors to the end helps me balance everything in my portrait. Mistake number 7 is getting streaky washes. And this happens not only to beginners but also to experienced watercolorists. Usually the culprit is uneven drying or going back into your wash while it's settling or using the wrong kind of brush, which I already mentioned earlier in this video. To fix uneven drying, the easiest thing that you can do is to tilt your board or watercolor pad while you work. The tilt does not need to be extreme, but it should be enough to let the excess water gently move downward. When a wash sits completely flat on the table, that's when most irregular drying and streaks appear. Streaks can also happen when the mixture is too thick and doesn't have enough water. Water is the component that unifies the wash, so you should aim for a watery, consistent mix. Apply it in one go and don't go back to fix it while drying. Honestly, the fixes are often worse than the original uneven wash. You have to trust the process a little bit. If you want a deeper demonstration, I showed this exact technique in one of my previous videos. I will link it for you in the description. Mistake number 8 is making the shadows too light. Most beginners are afraid of going dark enough. Every now and then someone overdoes it, but in about 90% of the Skillshare projects that I review, the shading could easily use one more layer to create enough contrast. Without these darker values, the face looks flat. Shadows are what give portraits structure, depth, and emotion. And watercolor is so transparent, so you have to build them gradually. A good rule is this: if you think your shadows are dark enough, they probably still need one more layer. One thing that helps is comparing your shadow values to the rest of the painting, the background, the hair, even the clothing. It is much easier to judge contrast once those other elements are in place. So try adding the surrounding colors first and then decide whether your shadows need deepening. Seeing everything together makes it much clearer where the portrait still looks flat and where that extra layer will bring it to life. Mistake number 9 is painting hair without volume, and I do not mean a specific hairstyle. This is an incredibly common mistake when the face you painted looks beautifully shaded, all the form is there, and then the hair becomes flat because it's painted as individual strands from top to bottom. So hair is not a collection of tiny lines, it is a large three-dimensional form with light and shadow and a few areas of texture. When you focus only on strands, you lose that structure completely. A much better approach is to start with light texture first and then only paint mid-tones and darks. Pay attention to your reference. Just like on the face, in the hair mass, you can also identify basic values of light and shadow. Hair color also plays a huge role in the mixes that you choose for each value group. For example, blonde hair often has highlights that are almost pure white or slightly yellow. The mid-tones shift into warmer yellows or ochres, and the darkest areas can go all the way to deep brown. But black hair behaves a bit differently. With strong light, the highlights can still be almost white, but with softer lighting, they often appear in a different color, kind of gray, bluish, or even purple. The midtones can sit in the dark gray range, and the only deepest parts are truly black. What really matters is keeping your three value groups separate and easy to distinguish. That separation is what creates volume in the hair and prevents it from looking flat. If you'd like a more in-depth tutorial on painting hair with different hairstyles, different colors, let me know in the comments. And the final mistake I see people make, including myself, is sticking to old habits and avoiding experimentation. It is very tempting to stay in the comfort zone once you've found a process that finally works. You want to relax, paint a bunch of pieces using the same approach, because trying new things takes energy. But whenever I repeat the same approach way too many times, I start losing my drive. The paintings begin to look alike, a little bit generic, and that's always a signal that I need to experiment again, to question everything from my color choices to the way paint touches the paper. Experimentation does not have to be too dramatic. You can try new limited palette that you've never used before. Paint your first layer on wet paper instead of on dry. Switch to a different paper with the new texture that you didn't try yet. If you avoid backgrounds, paint one. If you hate green, make it the star of your palette. You can try granulating pigment or change the size of your painting, or even do a monochrome study. All of these small experiments help you discover something new that you can fold back into your regular process. So experimentation can build intuition, helps you loosen up, and slowly shapes a style that feels more expressive and personal. I actually identified at least 10 more mistakes that I used to make when I was starting out, but this video is long enough already, so I'll save those for another time. But now I'm curious, what mistakes do you recognize in your own work? Tell me in the comments. I will read through them all and I will dedicate an entire future video to the mistake that shows up the most so we can explore fixes together. And if you want a simple process for creating a watercolor portrait in 5 steps with only 3 colors, here's the next video and I will see you soon. Bye.